This is a video that I've been so excited to make for a very long time, but it's also been very difficult for me to try and make because if you've been around the channel for any amount of time, you'll know that I have a problem ranking things and putting them into lists. So when I decided to make a video talking about my top 5 favorite series, I was very nervous, and the first thing that I did was wrote down all of the series that I love. And then I realized there were so many series on the list that I obviously had to pare it down. I wanted to get it to 5, and it hurt. It physically hurt me to have to cut books that I love off of this list. But we've ended up where we've ended up, and I feel pretty good about it. If you would like to see a different video of this sort talking about some of the most influential series to me as a reader growing up, please let me know in the comment section below this video. And if you're subscribed to this channel and hit the notification bell, you'll actually get notified when that potential future video gets posted. Now let's get some housekeeping out of the way. Since we are talking about my favorite series in this video, I had to make some sort of qualifier for series, and thus I eliminated duologies, and I also eliminated books where there's only 2 books out in what is supposed to be a future series, aka like the Kingkiller Chronicles. Additionally, many of the series that I talk about in this video remain unfinished, but they are my favorite to constantly be reading, rereading, theorizing about, discussing about, etc. So yeah, a bunch of these series are not yet finished, but that doesn't stop me from loving them as much as I do. Let me love you. Before the actual top 5 list proper gets started, I will do what everyone who has ever made one of these videos has done before me, and I will give a list of 2 honorable mentions that could have made the list in a different parallel universe, but did not make the list in this universe where we live right now. The first of my honorable mentions thus goes as follows. I grew up in a Christian home with Christian parents as a Christian boy, and one of the things, especially in the 2000s, 90s era that existed, was almost this parallel culture that existed of like Christian branded media that was mimicking something in secular media. That's a whole nother discussion. But essentially for most things in mainstream pop culture, there was some rebranded, often lesser version of it for Christian culture. In mainstream culture, the hardcore, edgy, weird kids read Stephen King. But as we all as adults know, Stephen King's themes and subject matters are often very non-kid friendly. In the late 80s, there was an author named Frank Peretti who wrote Christian thriller horror novels. And he was sort of the progenitor of the author Ted Dekker. What Ted Dekker set out to accomplish in the 2000s, whether intentionally or not, though let's all be real, it was probably intentional, was some sort of Christian allegory version, think the Chronicles of Narnia, but with the scale and scope of something like the Dark Tower series by Stephen King. Very similar to Stephen King, the primary focus of this series was a fantasy novel that also sort of blended a lot of sci-fi elements, modern elements into it. It was actually really cool. And then one of the hooks that you might discover on your own is very similar to Stephen King's structure. There were a lot of standalone horror thriller novels that tied into this trilogy of books called the Circle Trilogy. Each of the books in that trilogy was named after a color. It was black, red, and white. And then Dekker wrote a bunch of other series and individual novels that all tied into this universe and all culminated with an additional book being added to the Circle Trilogy, making it a quartet, a quadrilogy. The 4th book was called Green, and it sort of completed the circle, as it were, since it's called the Circle Trilogy originally. I will stand by the fact this series to me as a teenager was so powerful and influential, and to this day I think it did a lot of really cool, interesting, brilliant things and re-examinations of elements. It's also very allegorical in a Christian sense, like I said, very much like C.S. Lewis, though maybe stronger in some senses and weaker in others. It's hard to explain. I very much still respect the Circle Trilogy in a sense. That being said, the more books and more lore got tied into the allegory of that original series, the more I think the waters got very muddy and things got very confusing and messages got mixed, not in a good way. And instead of liking that series, the more that got added to it, it felt like things were just getting added to it, making it worse over time. That being said, it was this huge thing I was obsessed with for a long time that I still hold a lot of respect for parts of it, but the series as a whole falls apart on many levels. So I've put that in my honorable mentions category. If I were to actually make a video about influential books to me over time, it would also have to be delved into majorly in that type of video. The second honorable mention that I have is a series that I fell in love with on this channel. It's almost asinine to talk about Twilight at this point. Many people, especially people my age, have already formed their opinions on Twilight or loved it back in the day and have moved on. Well, I never experienced Twilight as a young person. I was very aware of its existence. I got enough of the cultural references and jokes. I made many cultural references and jokes to the thing that I'd never seen. And any attempt I had at trying to read Twilight in the past completely fell apart. Usually within chapter 1, I just couldn't get into it. I fell into the hype of just making fun of the thing that people make fun of. However, documented well on this channel, you can check out that series of videos documented in a playlist on my channel page on YouTube. I chose to intentionally approach Twilight with a more open mind, with a very specific goal in mind to approach the series as my young, angsty teenage self would have. And let me tell you, reading that with friends, especially up to the release of Midnight Sun, being able to discuss that with people, being able to experience this thing that weirdly gave me nostalgia in some senses, it reminded me of my younger and angrier self, being able to revisit the teenage mindhood that is often unhealthy, unsmart. The journey was a blast, and I love the time that I had with Twilight, and the series of videos where I read through each of the books and then watched through each of the movies has been one of my favorite things here on BookTube. I loved it. I loved my time with it, but I cannot honestly say that Twilight is actually one of my top 5 favorite series, even if it was one of my top 5 experiences on BookTube. I could have made this honorable mention section way longer, but instead I'm just going to jump now to number 5 on my top 5 series of all time. Blake Crouch is one of my personal favorite authors. He's an instant buy, must-read author for me. He's very popular even in more mainstream circles. He's already had one television adaptation of his books, though I don't think that I would like that adaptation. And he currently has multiple other adaptations in the works for various streaming services. I think most people know Blake Crouch for his standalone science fiction thrillers like Dark Matter or maybe Recursion. Incidentally, those are the books that are getting turned into adaptations, I think, for Apple TV. But before those books, the original series that got adapted from Blake Crouch was the Wayward Pines Trilogy. I'm not here to say that the Wayward Pines Trilogy is high art. What I am here to say is that the Wayward Pines Trilogy appeals to me in some major ways. If you take a cast of characters and put them in a small town, and everyone in the town has secrets and something extremely weird is going on, and the character doesn't know what's going on, and you don't know what's going on, but everybody else in the town seems to know what's going on. That is a trope that I love in nearly every experience I've ever had with it. The story presented in Wayward Pines is nothing incredibly unique, though the execution of it is very fun. The action and drama and plotting and science fiction thrillerness that happens in this series is very much a popcorn blockbuster movie level of pacing, explosive hype. And while there are criticisms that even I have for this trilogy, it is such a crazy blast. It is also pretty short, but it's also insanely bingeable. Like, this is a series that I read through each book in one day because I couldn't get enough, I couldn't stop, and because it was already playing with some of my favorite tropes and story bits, and there was a ton of cool explosive action. It's just something that has appealed to me and stuck with me since I read it 4 years ago? If you've been following the channel for a while, you'll probably remember that I've recommended this series before or talked about it highly before because I can't stop, and I will use any opportunity I can to remind people, especially people that like Blake Crouch's standalone books, that the Wayward Pines trilogy is a ton of fun. It is different than his modern standalones. It might be closer to like a CW show on crack, but not Riverdale, like not that CW show. I think Riverdale is way more cracked out than even Wayward Pines is. People might call number 4 on my list a cheat, but I don't give a frick. This is my channel. One of my favorite experiences of being on BookTube is having people recommend books to me or being involved in buddy reads of books that I wouldn't have picked up on my own, at least at the timing that I do. But early on, after the creation of my Patreon, everyone was suggesting a list of books that we buddy read. We then voted on one of them, and one of the first books chosen was Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. If you're familiar with the fantasy book sphere, you will understand that this is the beginning of a huge series of books called The Realm of of the Elderlings. And percentage-wise, I've barely explored any of the realm of the Elderlings. But that series is broken up into trilogies of books that are sort of standalone, even though they do tie into the greater story of what's going on and everything. The first trilogy in that series is called the Farseer Trilogy. And as someone who was unfamiliar with most adult fantasy at the time, I barely knew anything about this series. I didn't really know very much about Robin Hobb. But when I picked up Assassin's Apprentice, my mind was quickly changed. Robin Hobb's prose, especially in the Farseer Trilogy, is absolutely beautiful. It is a joy to live in the world of the way she words everything. It feels very appropriate for what's going on, but it also feels so much more elevated than a lot of the books that I typically go to. And this isn't just like a book where I have a ton of quotes that I love from the book. It is the experience of reading the way that she tells her story. It's just excellent. And another one of the most highly praised elements of Robin Hobb's writing is her ability to do amazing character work, really put you in the mind of a character that you may or may not be able to relate to already, but make you feel their emotions and feel their pain in a way that really hurts, but it's so good. One of the studied benefits of reading fiction is being able to empathize with positions outside of our own, or to maybe better understand ourselves through characters that may resemble us in fiction. The combination of Hobb's character work in this book, being able to parallel it with things in your own life potentially, and then the excellence of her prose just makes the Farseer Trilogy something that I absolutely love. Now listen, a lot of people that recommend the Realm of the Elderlings series hate the Farseer Trilogy. They hate the main character. His name is Fitz. And many people even recommend, if you want to get into the Realm of the Elderlings, to completely skip the Farseer Trilogy. If you want to have a wrong opinion, that's fine. I just want to present the counter argument that I love the Farseer Trilogy so freaking much. I think it's so good. I think about it all the time. Fitz, I think, is an excellent character. I'm not saying you agree with everything that he does or he's a smart character. I'm saying he's a character that feels real, and I want to give him a hug so badly. Lean on me. Number 3 on my list of favorite series. This one is the Dresden Files. Now, I'm a little bit apprehensive to bring up the Dresden Files because it seems like no matter how much I praise the Dresden Files on this channel, no matter how many positive things I say about the Dresden Files on this channel, no matter how many times I say it's amazing, no matter how many times I say that I love it, the fact that I have criticisms of it seems to negate anything positive I say about the series. If you look at my video where I talk about should you read the Dresden Files, a lot of the comments, especially comments that come in lately, are people essentially saying that I hate the series or that I'm criticizing things that aren't real, or I'm over focusing on criticisms. Whatever, people can have wrong opinions. The Dresden Files has awful moments, like cringeworthy moments that make me want to throw the book sometimes. The Dresden Files is an urban fantasy that takes place in the modern times. I say modern times, the book started a long time ago, categorically speaking. And so in the first book, all of the technology that we have now didn't exist yet because I think it was written in the early 2000s. And side note, dang, it's been weird to see how much stuff has changed just from when the Dresden Files started to now, technologically speaking, societally speaking. Regardless, the book is about a youngish to middle-ish aged dude that is almost perpetually single. He displays a lot of admirable qualities. He displays a lot of annoying qualities. But over the course of the series, he feels like a real, fleshed out, well-executed character study as you get to see him grow so much over the course of these books. The world expands in a way that I've never seen a book be able to accomplish, where it starts one way and over time morphs into something so much bigger than the sum of its parts. Like I said in my original Dresden Files video, it's crazy how the series goes from feeling like a monster of the week, fun but not amazing thing, to one of the greatest fantasy series still going today. In spite of all the criticisms that I have against it, it cannot be denied how good so many elements of the Dresden Files are, how much it affected me when individual plot points happened, the way that the world and the story escalates to a point where it really does escalate on a really interesting curve of scale, where it starts building and building and building, it gets really big, it cuts back, and now it's big again with the most recent 2 books. And I oftentimes criticize the type of person who says, oh, you can't give up on something if you don't like the first book, you have to read like the first 6 books. I genuinely think if you don't like the beginning books of the Dresden Files, it probably isn't the series for you. But if you like but don't love the early books of the Dresden Files, you might want to stick around for a little bit. And this is the point where I have to say this, even though people are going to get mad. This is a series almost entirely told in the first person head of a young dude. And if the subjects of male gaze or white knighting or characters being put in sexually charged situations for no real apparent reason except for potentially author and reader fan service, if those are sensitive issues for you, you will have a problem with that series. Many people that I respect completely valid opinions when they criticize the series for those things. Maybe in my original video, I didn't express that I think sometimes there is nuance that gets ignored in certain individual elements of any of those things in any of the given books. That being said, there are still moments that are embarrassingly cringe-worthily written, and those cannot be ignored no matter how much praise I have for the series. There's certain things that happen in the series I just think they're gross, unnecessary, and as I've said before and will continue to say, any of the criticisms that you hear regarding those topics are likely true, though, like I said, not all of them bother everyone to the same amounts in the same instances every time. It's almost more to the series' credit that even though there are times when I've wanted to throw a Dresden Files book, I've also felt more feelings to Dresden characters than I have in almost any other series ever. The amount of times that I was moved to tears or was listening to the audiobook and I just wanted to like cheer out loud in spite of being out in nature for everyone to see. I didn't care because my friends in this fantasy series accomplished something flipping awesome or had something beyond horrific happen to them. I love the Dresden File. Number 2. This is the most recent of the series on my list as far as like books that I've read most recently to making this video. And it is a series that during my career on BookTube, so many people on the fringes of my channel, in the comments and the discords, were constantly recommending it, hyping it up, saying it was one of their favorite series. I just didn't partake. It wasn't like I had a problem with it. But sometimes you get in the perfect mood to read the perfect book at the perfect time, and it appeals to you in the perfect way. The Cradle series by Will White is one of my favorite series ever right now. Cradle is the series I always wanted, even if I didn't know it. It takes all of the elements of the things that appeal, especially to my younger self, but even to my adult self. Elements of superhero stories, science fiction, and fantasy combined. A novel version of a story like Dragon Ball Z, where you see a character that is weak and they have essentially no value in the society that they are born and raised in. But they use that weakness and their spirit and heart to go against the deterministic path set before them. Cradle appeals to the young boy inside of so many people that just wants to affect change. They just want to be able to protect the people that they love. They have goals and dreams, and no matter who tells them that they can't do it, they try to do it. The Cradle series starts off largely by the numbers with a character in that exact scenario that I painted. And even though that is a well-worn trope in the sphere of fiction, even in the first book of Cradle, the way that the stakes are introduced is incredibly unique and it's done magnificently. It is executed so well with so much foreshadowing and so much weird nuance. I absolutely loved it and I was curious. By the end of the first book of Cradle, I was like, that was a really cool twist. I want to see where we're going. By the end of the second book of Cradle, I said, oh, it's really interesting how they're fleshing out the magic system here, and it seems like they're going to explore the world. This seems like it's going to be fairly formulaic. By the end of the third book of Cradle, I said, that was very fun. I want to see where this journey goes. At some point, I realized I was addicted to the world of Cradle and the way that it expands to a scope beyond this. Like, listen, I was praising the scope of Dresden and the way that it's executed. The scope of Dresden is an urban fantasy that becomes an epic fantasy. The scope of Cradle is a Dragon Ball Z story. So, of course, it gets magnitudes larger, like incomprehensibly larger in a way that is less dense and like less dense and serious, but not quite popcorn level. It feels like popcorn, but it is deeper than that. but it is an action-packed ride, one where any criticisms that I have of the series at the early points get addressed as we go, and any criticisms that come up get addressed as we continue to go through the series, to the point where I just don't care anymore. Like, I can't fault any of the elements that I'm seeing because I feel like they're just going to get answered in the next book. Cradle exists in a genre called progression fantasy, one that I have to explore more to fully be able to explain, because on its surface that is a dumb title. Of course, characters progress in fantasy, but this is on a level beyond any regular fantasy series. Critics of the series may say that it's not subtle at all. It feels sort of like it's written for children. It's very basic. I don't disagree with it, except that I think the subtlety comes by the fact that you don't realize how much it's hooking you, and you don't realize how many things are moving behind the scenes and how many elements of foreshadowing there are. This series has a lot more going for it than you could possibly imagine, especially at the beginning on a surface read. And there will be times that you think things are moving slow until you look backwards and realize just how far things have come. And when you start to become that nerd fan that starts to understand elements of the magic, the battles come alive in crazy ways. This is the sort of series I need to see adapted in some sort of animated show, and the way that Will White gets better as the characters get more powerful and they get more things in their tool belt to be able to have these long, incredibly epic, sometimes just one-on-one battles, though eventually, of course, they escalate like everything in Cradle does. It feels like something made to appeal to middle-grade dudes, and it definitely probably does, but in my experience, it's the most heightened, elevated version of that type of thing that I've ever experienced. I freaking love Cradle. I don't feel like I can express that enough. And finally, let's conclude with my favorite series. I feel like anyone who has already seen videos from my channel probably already knows the answer to this, but my discovery of Brandon Sanderson's The Cosmere is just unparalleled in my reading experience. He's a prolific author. I feel like most people looking at this video might already know who he is or have seen his name before, but there's still a shocking number of people who have not read or heard of The Cosmere. If you are looking to get into fantasy, I recommend The Cosmere, though it's a very big ask, not because the books are bad, because there's so many of them and they're so long. The thing about The Cosmere is it is an interconnected universe of stories that are increasingly having more tie-ins with each other or cross lore information between the worlds, but each of the series is sort of separate, and each of the series almost exists within its own subgenre of fantasy. So if you're the type of person that enjoys reading different flavors of fantasy, epic fantasy, especially of the more modern variety where it's very character focused, Brandon Sanderson is an excellent author. His series are all over BookTube for what I think is very good reasons. He has haters, he has detractors, and his books don't work for everyone. But there's a reason why he's so big, and there's a reason why the fans of The Cosmere are so passionate about The Cosmere. It's because it's flipping awesome. His ability to create characters with hero's journey type arcs and plots so meticulously foreshadowed throughout their books that somehow he is able to both surprise you and also make you think, oh, he did sort of allude to that the whole time and I never realized it. Brandon Sanderson is an excellent author. The Cosmere is an excellent series. From the Stormlight Archive to both eras of Mistborn, the standalones, Elantris, Warbreaker, all of the short stories and novellas, they are so much fun, and you get the benefit when you're reading one of them of being able to take some of the knowledge of the series that you're reading and realize that it's relevant to more than just the current series that you're reading. It's part of this bigger project. The main person who I would not recommend The Cosmere to is people that are super into grimdark. These stories are much more hopeful. I think that's one reason they appeal so much to me. But the truth is that The Cosmere does really appeal to a lot of people who have a lot of different tastes. The people that I talk about The Cosmere with on an essentially daily basis come from different backgrounds of enjoying different levels of grim, dark, children's literature, different adult literature, the Cosmere is something that we can all come together and enjoy, or sometimes not enjoy. It's okay if you don't like it. But it's my favorite series, and it's been a really long time since I've cared about a series so much as to constantly be watching like live streams where people are asking Q&As about world building stuff, or having different theoretical discussions with various groups and different discords on the internet. When the books are new, I love the discussions and live streams that happen that I get to partake in around each of the Cosmere books that I've been able to do so with. It's not an original opinion, but it is my opinion. The Cosmere is my favorite series going right now. Here's the part of the video where you get to critique everything that I said. Do you agree or disagree with my assessments of each of these series? I very much would love to hear if I convinced you to potentially check out any of these series, even if it's just to add it to your ever-growing, infinitely sized TBR. It still feels good if I may have potentially convinced you to read something awesome. And here's the part where I openly welcome the criticism, though it's probably going to come whether I want it to or not. What series did I definitely ignore that I should not have ignored? I know for a fact I'm going to get a ton of people saying A Song of Ice and Fire. It happens anytime I make a list video. I definitely know somebody is going to say something about Joe Abercrombie. I'm doing my best to resolve that now. I have restarted reading The Blade itself. I'm trying to get into the Abercrombie verse. I'm sorry for not knowing about it already. Here's a hot take. I don't care for the Greenbone saga. I've only read the first 2 books, but I actively disliked the second one. And with the last 30 seconds of this video, I've probably caused enough controversy for everyone to unsubscribe for the channel. If you'd liked it, please fight against that tide, subscribe to the channel. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. I'd love to talk to you in another video soon. I can't wait to read your responses. As I've said before, it's okay to have wrong opinions, but you don't have to listen to me because I'm not your dad, but I am your best friend. Goodbye. From 1 to 92, although it's been said many times, many ways.